Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Scholarly Snippets. Today, I am joined by my guest, Lindsay Beckley, who has a bachelor's in history with a public history concentration, and she is currently working as an outreach coordinator slash researcher for a state historical agency. Lindsay, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So, welcome to Scholarly Snippets. This is my talk show where I interview different people with degrees in fields related to history. What originally got you interested in history?
Um, I would say my interest in history started probably when I was a kid. We here in Indiana, we went to a an interactive history park, I guess they call it, Conner
Hmm.
Prairie, and it's basically living history. And I loved that so much. I begged my parents to take me back like every week. And I kind of fell in love with history then. And then it just kind of developed over time into a love of research and a love of following clues and historical tidbits to figure out, kind of the story behind how the world works. So really started then, and then in college when I took my first survey course, I really renewed my interest in history because it was more than just names and dates. It was doing history.
So, for people that aren't historians yet, or they're just really new to the historical field, what is a survey? What was that you just mentioned?
Survey courses are
Survey
undergraduate
course.
history courses where it's typically like a US history course is a survey course, so it's like not a very specific, like once you get into your sophomore, junior, senior year in uh, I guess college history, you'll get into the two, three, 400s uh,
Okay, I see
level
what you're saying.
classes. So basically a 100 level history course.
Cool. So yeah, you obviously have stuck with your history for a while. When you were starting to get interested in it, though, like when you were growing up and you're going through high school and you're starting to look for colleges, how did you go about choosing a college to get a degree from?
So I actually originally went to college for I think biology. And I changed after my first year. And I was very, very lucky to be going to Ball State because they have one of the few undergrad public history degrees that you can get.
Hmm.
So I was kind of looking at going into history since I'd always really loved history, and talked with my advisor and was kind of talking out that I don't really want to be a history teacher. That's not really what I'm looking at. I would much rather work in a museum or something along those lines. And he mentioned public history sounded more like my speed and that they had a really good undergrad program. So that's what I ended up going into and never looked back.
That's interesting. So why did you originally go into, or like, I know you originally went into biology, but what changed after that first year?
I'm very bad at math.
Hmm. So there's a lot of
So
math and biology courses.
in the course or in the track I was on, I think I was in like pre-calc my first semester, and by the end of that I was like, this is not going to work
Oh
out. But
no.
if this is the beginning, I can't make it to the end.
Yeah, right. So yeah, history was more appealing, and you already
Absolutely,
had
I only
the
had to take one math
lifelong
class.
interest. One math class, yeah, that is
Mm.
definitely appealing to people who do not want to be taking math classes. So, what's been your favorite part so far? Like pursuing a history type field in education.
I think my favorite part is every time I start a new project or start researching a new topic, I get to dispel my own misconceptions about it.
Hmm.
So every time no matter how hard I try to come into a new topic, unbiased, if that even exists, I, through my researching, I kind of learn my own biases and dispel them and kind of come to better understand those in history that I once misunderstood. An example being, I recently did a lot of research on Ryan White, who was a young teenager from Indiana who contracted AIDS from his hemophilia treatments. And I grew up knowing the story because I'm from the same state. And he ended up being kind of not ran out, but he was heavily discriminated against in his hometown and ended up having to um, move schools. And I always looked at those people that discriminated against him and that were, kind of slandering him. And I could never understand where they were coming from. Obviously, I still don't condone that, but
Mhm.
I, immersing myself in their world for a while kind of lent some perspective to me that they were very scared and they were very misinformed. So kind of like right now, actually, I'm seeing a lot of parallels between the AIDS crisis, especially the beginning of the AIDS crisis, and now.
Yeah, it's interesting how so many parallels can be drawn between seemingly unrelated events. So to summarize, basically what your favorite part has been so far has been the disillusionment of really comprehending a topic and getting informed on it and kind of getting rid of those naive expectations and beliefs of like what you thought it was, and now you have all this evidence and literature to
Absolutely.
back up what it actually is. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Would have been like the most challenging aspects of your pursuit here?
Um, I think that most people in public history will back me up in saying that finding a good paying job is difficult. I was super, super, super lucky and got a very steady, stable job um, where I don't have to worry even now about being furloughed or anything like that. It's very steady. They're dependable. It's a great group of people that I work with. And I got all of that with an undergraduate degree, which is incredible. But I know that not everybody is that lucky. And I don't make that much money. And it's very hard to make very good money in the field. So I think that's the biggest challenge.
So the biggest challenge is the economic factors and being able to
Yeah.
support yourself through it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is probably a common theme that historians struggle to find work unless you have like a very advanced degree. I think I was just talking about this on the last episode that really you specialize in something, and uh, depending on how in demand your specialty is, that'll determine your pay grade. So yeah, that's also interesting and something good to keep in mind for people, that even if people aren't as lucky as you were to be able to find steady employment, that possibly they wouldn't be able to keep on pursuing their passion in history and would
Well,
have to
and
resort to other
there are
stuff.
so many ways to pursue a passion in history without going into the profession of history. Um,
How would you suggest doing that?
Museums always need volunteers that work with visitor services or who work even with the collections or research. You can do a lot just by volunteering. I know that's um, easy for me to say. If you're passionate and you want to do it full
Right.
time, it's possible. Obviously, it's possible. Millions of people do it, but especially right now with they're anticipating a lot of museum closings
Hmm.
due to the pandemic, like complete closings.
Like never
Uh,
reopening.
yeah, there's gonna be a lot of movement in the field coming up where people who have long careers in highly or in mostly in small museums are probably going to be looking for new work.
That's interesting. I haven't heard anything about that yet.
Yeah, I saw an article. It's been maybe a month or so ago. They're anticipating 1/3 of all museums that close won't open again.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's quite a few. There's thousands of museums across the world, so
absolutely.
yeah, that's pretty wild. So yeah, you were lucky enough to find consistent employment. How did you go about finding that job?
I started out working actually at Conner Prairie, which is where I found my love of history.
Mhm.
I started working there part time. It's very hard to get full time there just because of it's a seasonal affair, so it's hard to get full time there. So I worked there part time for a year or so, and then I just needed a full time job, so I actually worked for an airline for a while,
Hmm.
and then I ended up finding my current job on the job board for the National Council on Public History. So that's a agency here in Indiana. That's a national agency. for public historians, and they post a lot of job openings and things like that. So if you're looking for a job in the public history field, that is my A1 place to look.
Sounds like a good resource.
Absolutely.
So, what are some of the responsibilities of your job? You told me that you're a coordinator researcher. What does that look like?
Yeah, so those are kind of two different sides of my job. My official title is researcher, but I am the outreach coordinator, is kind of where I fit into our group. We are an agency of just 5 people, so we're
Hmm.
very small, and that means that we wear a lot of hats. All of us wear a lot of different hats. So I do all of our agency's social media. I spend a lot of my days crafting social media posts and doing social media interactions with our followers and stuff like that.
The
And then,
outreach coordinator title, that's starting to form a picture here for me. I see what
yeah,
that entails. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm
that's
on a
cool.
lot of different historical society boards and like the Indiana Council for Social Studies. I'm on their board, and so I go to a lot of meetings and try to represent our agency and see where we can collaborate with other historical institutions. That's a big thing when you're a small agency that doesn't have very much money. Um, Collaborating with other agencies is a huge thing because we can't be experts in everything, and other people have already done this work. We don't want to
Right.
reinvent the wheel.
Yeah,
So,
and really, like, when you start getting into history, there's just so much content. There's no way a single person could get all that together. And so, reaching out to other people, like what we're doing here, and sharing information like this is a great way to get some of that out and to collaborate with others on, the cross studies, getting all the heads together and figuring out what's just happened in the past. Because, I mean, like, human memory is it's very fickle, and trying to figure out what had happened even last week, down the
yeah.
street can be a difficult task, much less figuring out what happened halfway across the globe 1,000 years ago. um, there's quite a bit in there, so I feel like you covered quite a bit on like the outreach coordinator aspect. What is the research part of that?
Yeah, so I research for historical markers. So, um, roadside markers as you're driving down the road and you see like such and such happened here or so and so
Yeah.
lived here. I do research and development for those. So,
Hmm.
all of our applications come from the public, and we work with the public on getting those installed. We do all of the research. So, you see those markers, they have about 270 letters on each side, and I spend about 3 months researching that. So,
We have a old, it's like a canal or something. It's like a waterway under a bridge that was
mhm,
used for the old railroad that came through, and now it's a bike path. They took the railroad out,
mhm.
and my girlfriend and I, we ride our bikes down to it sometimes, and they have a whole plaque with information about it. Is that kind of what you do? You sort of get the information as to what this site was, and then you help out with the city to get that put up for people to look at?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a state agency. So we do all of the kind of statewide significant events and people. So they have to demonstrate that this isn't just a local,
Hmm.
like locally important topic. It has to be national, or sorry, either nationally or statewide significance. But yeah, we basically are. That's actually a really good example of a old railroad that has been turned into a bike lane. Um, a lot of times, what we're doing is restoring history to the landscape. So if a building is torn down and it had a statewide significance while it was standing, we can put a marker there to recognize that that site used to be this. It's not always that. Of course, we have lots of markers outside of places that are still standing and still operational, even as what we're marking. But a lot of times we are kind of restoring that narrative to the landscape.
So you said that you do it on a statewide basis. I would imagine then that there's people that do it on a local basis too. So like the person I doubt that everybody across Michigan is going to know about this railroad bike path thing, but somebody here near Rockford or Cedar Springs, they would be the one taking care of that. Maybe the county. Do you know how that works? How
Yeah.
they segregate the different areas?
Yeah, typically there are state agencies that do it. Sometimes it's like the State Historical Society. Sometimes it's even the like the roads, whatever your road agency is. Sometimes they'll have a little office there that does that. So usually there's a state level, and then there are local levels. County historical societies will do it, and then there are like interest groups that will do it. So here in Indiana, there we're a big racing area
Yeah,
because
right.
of the speedway. So there's a group here that does strictly car related or racing related markers. And there's also a group that does like strictly basketball related
Hmm.
markers. So I just really stereotyped Indiana hardcore, but
So this is like I'm starting to understand this, and I guess it's kind of like it makes a lot of sense as to how those things get there. But when I'm out on my bike ride, I'm not thinking who put this here, like who made up this information. Is when you put that stuff down, is there a part on it that says so and so put this here, like the Society
yeah,
of History or something? I'll have
yeah,
to go check that.
typically at the bottom of at least our historical markers, most historical markers, at the bottom, there'll be a credit line that says installed by agency name. And then it usually lists a few partners because all of ours are public. The public applies for them and pays for them. So
Hmm.
their names will be on there too.
Yeah, that is cool. Um, Sweet. So I've just got my list of questions here. We talked about your job and how you went about finding it and kind of what you do. What would have been some of the challenging parts of your job that you've had to deal with?
So with my job in particular, one of the challenging parts is that I do work for a state agency. And whether or not I think I am being political in my statements or in my writing, sometimes I have to go back and censor myself to
Hmm.
make sure that it's not coming across as political, which I appreciate having to do just because it makes me read critically my own work. But it's also something that sometimes I'm not able to go quite as far as I want to go. We also have a podcast that I host. So sometimes I'll get going with my writing on the podcast and then go back and be like, that might just tip the scale there. So I need to roll that back just a little bit to make sure I'm being fairly neutral.
So yeah, the keeping a neutral standpoint on things that's sort of been a difficulty. It's kind of like the bias you were talking about. Like we strive to not let our biases affect our work, but they seep in
Absolutely.
regardless. So
I will say that history agencies and museums as a whole are not and should not be neutral. We shouldn't strive for neutrality just to be neutral,
mhm.
um, because if we're not going to tell the truth, if we're going to, sand down the edges of the truth to keep it neutral, then we're doing a disservice to our um, jobs and our
Right.
citizens. So when I say neutral, I guess not overtly political is what I mean,
Right. Like you don't want to sacrifice truth for the sake of satisfying this concept of neutrality.
which is a construct, anyways.
Right, exactly. Um yeah, so I think that was a great response. I don't think you mentioned that you had a podcast. Do you want to talk about that at all? Or
Sure.
yeah, what is
Uh,
that about?
our podcast is called Talking Hoosier History,
What is
and
that? Talking Hoosier?
yeah, Talking Hoosier History. So we
Huh.
cover different stories from Indiana history. We try to choose topics that are less well known, or if we choose a well known figure like Lincoln or George Rogers Clark,
Hmm.
which are two of our very famous people, obviously.
Right.
Um, we try to cover them from different angles or add some complexity that is usually missing from the story. So we're trying to challenge Hoosiers' ideals of themselves. So we did an episode on socialism in Indiana.
Hmm.
We've done episodes on like radical social movements other than socialism. we've covered a lot of things that kind of challenge the stereotypical uh, idea that a lot of people have of Hoosiers.
Yeah, I didn't realize there were such a strong stereotype for Hoosiers. Is that what you call people from Indiana? Or
Yes.
yeah,
So our official moniker is Hoosiers. People that don't live in Indiana might call us Indianans, and people from Indiana hate that. So,
yeah. Here in Michigan, I think a lot of people go by Michigander
mm-hmm,
or Michiganders up here. So yeah, it's funny how each of the states they have their own sort of slang for the people that live there to just
mm-hmm.
talk about the collective whole. So yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that Indiana had such a strong tie-in with socialism. You know, you think Indiana, you're thinking racetracks, but
Eugene V. Debs was from Indiana, born and raised in Terre Haute, Indiana.
so do you have anything else that you can share about your podcast with us? Any upcoming things that are in the
Yeah.
wraps, like a little bit of a preview, maybe?
Yeah, I just interviewed earlier today Ben Barnes, who is the chief of the Shawnee tribe.
Hmm.
So that was very interesting. We recently wrapped up a two-part series on Tenskwatawa, who was a Shawnee leader here in Indiana, or what would become Indiana, and he was I say Shawnee, he was from the Shawnee tribe, but he actually started a pan Indian resistance movement um, to resist white encroachment on native lands. And it was very interesting researching and writing those topics or those episodes, and even more interesting getting to talk to Ben Barnes. So,
Yeah, I would imagine that sounds really cool. Ooh, just one more time. What's the name of your podcast?
talking Hoosier history.
Talking Hoosier
Uh,
History.
yeah.
That sounds fun. All right. Do you have any plans for the future aside from the podcasting related to history? Like, would you ever be interested in pursuing a higher degree than the bachelor's? Or
So I would love to pursue a higher degree, and my research based job really lends itself to going into a grad program very easily. I think that I basically write a thesis 3 times a year, so I think I would love to do it, but I also understand that I would not be able to hold a full-time job while going through the program. The program nearest us is IUPUI's public history program, and it's great, wonderful, but you can't have a full-time job. And I'm not leaving my job, my full-time history job, to get a degree that then I might not be able to find another full-time history job.
right, yeah, there's quite a risk there. So yeah, then I guess a challenging part of pursuing a higher degree is the time that it takes to do that. Even doing part-time schooling is it takes a lot of time. So
Yeah, especially if if you've married and you have kids and you have a house and you
two dogs,
have all
yeah.
these other responsibilities, you can't quite find the time, or at least I can't imagine finding the time for
Yeah, right.
school.
To squeeze that in there. Wow. Cool. So, I just want to give everyone on this series a chance to leave a message for people, especially the younger people who are interested in expanding their knowledge on history, either, hobbyists or people who are interested in pursuing a career. What is your message to those types of people?
I would say nourish your passion however you can, whether that's reading books about history or sewing retro clothing or cooking old recipes. History is so much more than names and dates on a page. You can interact with history in so many different ways. I'm taking a baking course this Sunday that is baking ancient Roman ceremonial cakes. Like, you can do so many things. And by doing the things that people in history did, you become a little bit closer to those people in history. You understand what they went through, you understand what they were doing in an everyday setting, unlike you would with reading a book. I love reading books. I read lots of historical based books, but there's nothing quite like, engaging in history in different ways.
That's a great message. I enjoyed that. So thanks for sharing. I just have another question based on that. Do you find yourself ever reading nonfiction, or do you ever find yourself reading fiction? Like personally, I just don't ever really read fiction. Like I get my fiction from like TV and from like video games. Other than that, like I'm reading like scholarly articles off of JSTOR and Academia and sites like that. So
So I read scholarly articles and scholarly books 8 hours a day, every day. So I read high fantasy, is my jam when I'm at home, pretty much.
so to escape from the scholarly stuff, you like the high fantasy.
Oh, yes. Give me some elves and some dwarves and some magic, and I'll be happy.
Well, that is cool. Anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up here?
Not that I can think of. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, Lindsay, thanks for joining me. This has been fun. Thanks for sharing all your information, and
Of
take
course.
care.